subjects we're going to cover today. The first one is the idea of a parashat challah, which we about to finish yesterday. You know, it's a great mitzvah, particularly for women. Before Shabbat, while they're baking the challah, the dough, so they have to do a separation, which means they take part of the challah and they put it aside. In ancient time, they used to give it to the kohen, and nowadays they burn it. So the question is that biblical or rabbinic? The rabbis tells us that the mitzvah of parashat challah is a sgula. It's a blessing that brings upon a person in so many ways. I read the other day in a book that each letter of the parashat challah, hey pei reish, shin hey, chet lamed hey, each letter contain a different blessing in abbreviation. Another subject we're going to cover, Mitzvah Hashem, is a famous response from the late great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He has a question about ne'emanut, credible between father and son, meaning a father declared that the son is a kohen, and does that mean that just because the father said it, it is something that we accept? Imagine a situation, we saw it many times. You have people that came from Russia, and they have zero or close to zero background in Judaism. They live in an era of either communism or atheism or Gnosticism, but by any means they come to the synagogue, and those shoes that they're selling, the aliyot, all of a sudden the guy buying the first aliyah, and people turn to him and says, "Oh, why are you buying the first aliyah?" He said, "I'm a kohen." "How do you know you're a kohen?" "My name is Kohen." "So how do you know that you're a kohen?" "I don't. My father told me." Right? Did you ever did the aliyah? He doesn't know even how to read the first aliyah. Right? People in the shul are happy because they always feel, oh, we have only one kohen, he gets always the first aliyah, now all of a sudden he can share. But who told you that he's the real one? Right? So just because the father said, Tosfot have a big question with that. He said, we talk about migo, right? There's a negi'ah badavar sometimes, especially when the father testified over son. So if we said, like yesterday we said, Mesiach lefi tumo, meaning the person just talking, and you're talking naturally, so then you take some time the testimony just by saying those declarations. But here there's a disputation among the Rishonim how you treated. Is that rabbinic? Is that biblical? Is that accepted just for Nesiut Kapayim? Is that accepted for the first Aliyah, etc.? Furthermore, the Ktsot HaChoshen have a big discussion, the concept of Yakir meaning that they, in a way, the son is dear to his father. So if you tell me in via negativa that the father is credible to say that my son is illegitimate, my son is mamzer, you say that, okay, we're accepting that. So when it's come the other way, which is the father testified over the son that he's kohen, do you say that he is credible or not? Several Rashi Yeshivot, several great rabbis have a big discussion over that, how you take it, because it's the issue of negi'ah, meaning he's connected, he is attached to his child, and the question is that negi'ut applies in a relationship to a father, mother, or both, especially in the term of biblical or rabbinic. Another subject we're going to discuss with Hashem is the idea of conflicted testimony. Meaning, you have one fellow that testified over one thing, another fellow came and testified in the same manner but a different time, and then two separate witnesses came and disputed the previous one. Tracy's situation is of two fellows, let's call them Reuven and Shimon. One fellow by the name of Levi came in and he said, I saw when Shimon borrowed $10,000 from Reuven, and they shook hands and he took the money from him. I saw it. Fine. Then, later on a different day, a fellow by the name of Yehuda said, I didn't see Shimon borrowing money from Reuven, but Shimon came to me and he confesses to me that he bought 10,000 from Reuven. I never saw the money, I never saw them shook hands. But Shimon told me that. So you have two witnesses that said the same outcome with a different time, and in a sense, the same manner of testimony. Later, you have Issachar and Zvulun, two separate people that came together, and they said, we saw Shimon returning the money to Reuven, and we saw Reuven taking the money and give it to someone else. So now you have issue of two conflicted testimony between two, but the first one didn't come together, didn't testify over the same manner of which one borrowed the money from the other. So it's not only in conjunction to a law of monetary payment, it can have also further implication in regard to a personal properties, personal damage, and relationship between husband and wife, or testimony here with regard to Kohen. So where we are on page 26, 8 line from the top of the page.
Rabbi, just based on your introduction and just kind of going through a Mishna that we learned previously, it would seem to me that in the situation where a father might be testifying that his son is a Kohen, clearly there's not existing evidence that the father is a Kohen, because otherwise he wouldn't need to testify. Mm-hmm. And if he's testifying that his son's a Kohen, in effect he's actually testifying that he himself is a Kohen. Because he's saying, mm-hmm. So, and we already learned in the Mishnah that you can't, testify to your own kahuna. Mm-hmm. So it would seem to me that from that perspective, it wouldn't,
Let's refresh our memory from yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good point. Originally speaking, when it was the institution of kahuna, we understand that the framework of Kohen is part of the tribe of Levi, and in a sense, originally speaking, the Kohen has those privileges, which is receiving a special matnot kehuna, the gift of the Kohanim. The Kohen have a privilege of nesiut kapayim, to bless us, and more. Unfortunately, after the destruction of the first temple, 586 BCE, and our people were mainly exiled to Babylon, it was a period of time of about 70 years that the majority of our people were Babylon, and is no temple. The great leader of Ezra, we mentioned yesterday, led our people from Babylon to Eretz Israel, and together with another administrator by the name of Nehemiah, they built the second wood building of the temple, which later on Herod fixed it and make it a permanent building. Part of Ezra's notion of bringing people from Babylon, which was a hard task because wasn't only the financial issue, not only the fight against the Samaritans, but the whole idea of moving community from Babylon to unknown place in Israel and building the temple, it was a great task. So one of the issues that Ezra handled was the issue of who is a real Kohen. And we mentioned yesterday that they, since people married, they mentioned the family of Barzillai, etc., and did not have a written proof for their lineage, he, meaning Ezra, disqualified them. Furthermore, since it was the issue of certain people that refused to come or have the issue of lineage, that Ezra was very strict. From that point, we mentioned yesterday that the Rambam tells us that the whole concept of receiving trumot, receiving special contribution during the era of the Second Temple, and tithe was only rabbinic and not biblical because of the situation as well. One of the things that he said together with Nehemiah is saying to people, you have to wait for a Mashiach. You have to wait for the end of the days. You cannot prove at this point that you are a real Kohen. With that said, we enter the domain of our days. And that's the discussion we have yesterday at length. We asked those questions that Ksota Hoshen asked and others. What are you doing today and how far you go? We mentioned yesterday the story, for example, of the great Rav Zilberstein, the great Rav of the Ramat and Hanan in Bnei Brak, who, for example, have this Russian fellow that know from nothing, but the only story you remember from his family was before the three holidays, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, they bought sacks. So Rav Zilberstein derived from that it's a family of Kehuna, because they basically go on the bima, on the stage, to perform the Nesiut Kapayim without shoes. But again, the whole issue of qualification of Kehuna, the Vilna Gaon struggled with that at length. It was a time in Vilna, for example, that used to have a Sefer Yuchasim for people, and particularly the families that well known like Rappaport, etc., Katz, Kohen Tzedek, etc. But the reality is, you look at United States today, so many people who are not Jewish who call Kohen. So many people who call Kohen and they are not, either because they are halalim,
Right.
or because of indirect mamzerut, or just because who knows. So the point is, we struggle to this very day to define a Kohen, and that's the reason why you see, I mentioned yesterday, the minhag of my family. We are descendants of the Hasidic Rebbe of Zidichoiv. My grandfather was the Rebbe of Zidichoiv. So they, for example, have the minhag in Birkat Hamazon. You always figure out when you have zimun, especially if you have a minyan, should you give the kohen?
First, yeah.
And one of the things that sons have as well is the struggle. Who told you that it's a qualified kohen? One of the things that we believe Eliyahu will deliver to us is the real definition of kohen. So we struggle with that. We try our very best, but by the fact that someone, as we mentioned earlier, come in and said, I'm a kohen, some community take the word, some not. So it's one of those struggles.
Just one quick question again. In the situation with Ezra, when these families that he didn't allow to be Kohanim,
Right.
What became of them? Were they then considered halal? Did they become Leviim, or were they just Yisraelim? I mean, what did to those families that weren't allowed to be Kohanim? Did they?
So in a sense, it's like Israelim.
Israelim, so they don't revert back to being Leviim because they were originally from the tribe of Levi.
No, but there is a book called Ktav Sofer. Ktav Sofer we mentioned a little bit yesterday, that he also struggled with that. And he extensively wrote about it. He quoted Nodab Yehuda, etc. The bottom line is, one of his struggle, as we mentioned yesterday, is Rosh Chodesh Aliyah. Because what happened Rosh Chodesh, the second Aliyah, you repeat the pasuk. So he tried to bring a notion that you ask the first Kohen to leave, and then you ask a different Kohen to get, and then it was the issue of ziluta, that you figure out that people think that something wrong with the Kohen.
Right.
And therefore, the bottom line, you don't do that. But as I said, mentioned several times, it's one of those things that each Rav in its own respected community makes a determination, and it's a big struggle. 8 lines from the top of page 26. תניא רבי שמעון בן אלעזר אומר, כשם שתרומה חזקה לכהונה, כך מעשר ראשון חזקה לכהונה. So here he said that the same way that when you have Ma'aser Rishon, the first tithe, so that's basically giving to the Kohen. The same distribution of Truma, the same applied to the first tithe. והחולק בבית דין אינה חזקה, meaning if and one who receives a share of Truma in Beit Din, so that does not establish a presumptive status of kehuna, of priesthood. So the Gemara said, Ma'aser Rishon leLevi. So we give the first tithe to Levi. So why it's in by the Kohen? We understand, yesterday we said about Ezra, that he put a special fine in the Leviim, etc., etc., so it goes double to the Kohanim. But here why? So they said, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, תרומה לכהן מעשר ראשון ללוי, דברי רבי עקיבא, he quoted במדבר, book of Numbers, chapter 18, verse 26. רבי אלעזר בן עזרא אומר, מעשר ראשון אף לכהן, because Kohen by its nature, it's also called Levi, so he have both. That's, if you remember, we studied it in Gemara in Yevamot, page 86b, that this is one of the 24 places in the Torah, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that the Torah called the Kohanim Leviim, since they came from the same tribe of Levi. Eimu de Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lekohen velo lelevi mi amar. So Gemara said, "En batar de kansinu Ezra." Now we back to what we said yesterday, that Ezra have an issue with all those people that people who was a issue of moving, coming, being part of that, They didn't want to immigrate from Babylon to Israel. And it's written in the book of Ezra, chapter 8, verse 15, that he put a fine against those people. He has that power. We need an Ezra nowadays. And Nehemiah also in chapter 10, verse 39, said the same. So therefore, you read in Tosfot, he tells us that that fine was for the first tithe. There is a pasuk we said in the book of Psalms, Ech nashir et shir Hashem al admat neichar. The Leviim used to chant, used to sing. And while it was the evil Nebuchadnezzar, they didn't want to chant. One of the things is they don't want them to have the resonance of the holy temples and the holy temple ritual of songs, etc., at the foreign land. But anyway, Ezra put a fine. So therefore, you see that we have a chazakah, we have this presumptive way, that if someone receives a first tithe, Maaser Rishon is a kohen. V'dilma ikru v'yahavu lei, maybe the one who honors, they give it to those people. So there is a book called Kovetz Shurim he brought, that Kohen is basically, by its nature, as we said, is also part of the Levi, of the tribe of Levi. So therefore, since the Torah used the term Vegam Mibnei Aaron, and also from the descendants of Aharon, the high priest, so they have which we call Kedushat Kehuna, the sanctity of the priesthood. So, for example, when it's Kohen loses for prohibit relation, etc., etc., the result of that is halal, which means the child is no longer Kohen. So here, think about it. If Kohen, for example, cohabited with one of those that he's prohibited, right? So the child is no longer Kohen. It means that that child is not only not Kohen, but cannot be Levi by its nature. But you see here that is two separate entities. He turned to be pasul, disqualified, but not Levi. So here the Kovetz Shurim said that you don't have a proof that the receiver is a Kohen. אמר רב חיסדא הכא מההסכם כגון המוחזק לה בעבור ידי חי. וכהן הוא ונפק עליה קלה דבן גרושה וחלוצה הוא. So originally speaking, you have a situation that it's the word came out. Meaning, imagine a situation, there is no Kohen. They want to give a tithe. To whom they give a tithe? So the Meiri said, by force of circumstance, what do? You give it to the Levi. So, first you derive from that, the Minchat Chinuch said in Shin Tzadik Hey, the Minchat Chinuch said that you derive from that, following the Rambam we mentioned yesterday, that Trumot u'Maasot, that giving tithe during the era of the second Beit HaMikdash, it's only by rabbinic law. The Beit HaLevi go further to say that you see here the difference following this Rambam, who said that when it's come to Truma is the Rabbanan, it's rabbinic. When it's come to Maaser, giving tithe, is biblical. Now, the Minchat Chinuch elaborated and he said, a big question is, the sages cannot do akirat davar ma'Torah, to take away, uprooted something that is written clearly in the Torah. So, if you tell me that Trumot u'Maasot is a biblical, so how come Ezra uprooted something that it's total biblical? So the Minchat Chinuch said, Ezra was the exception. He put a rule against the Leviim because they refused to immigrate, to make aliyah, and therefore he transferred the Trumot u'Maasot to the Kohanim. And therefore, if you follow the Rambam, it's only rabbinic. But the Minchat Chinuch said that if you tell me that, you have a concept that's called Hefker Beidin Hefker. So basically, if you go over that, it's a challenging to say the way that the Rambam put it, that during the era of the Second Temple, it's all rabbinic. But back to our subject, here you have a situation that Torah said in the book of Leviticus chapter 21 verse 7, that Kohen, for example, is prohibited to marry a divorcee. So the sages came in and they put also chalutza. What is chalutza? Remember we talk in Tractate Yevamot, women that the husband passed away without children and she needs to do yibum, meaning the surviving brother needs to marry her, and he refused to do it, and therefore he released her by performing a chalitza and he exempted her. So she is in a way similar to divorcee, meaning in a sense the same that the bill of divorce exempt a wife from the relationship with her husband, the same way chalitza is basically exempted her from the yavam, and she can go out and marry whoever she wished to based on what we study in Yevamot, page 24. So a child, a son that was born to kohen from any category of those women, such as grusha, such as chalutza, he is a new status that is called halal, and therefore halal, as Gilbert asked, and now I answer again, has the same category as regular Israel. He is not turned to be Levi. So here is the reputation, Vechalkuli ledidei maaser bebeit hakranot. But we saw that this fellow received a tithe in the share of the first tithe at the threshing floor. So the question is, the lav levihu. So in my book on Rashi, Rashi said, Klomar belevi leika lesepukei deha aviv kohen. So the question appears, the way I understand this Rashi is, why the Gemara used this term? It's not clear, the lav levihu. So I think Rashi meant to say that if you have in your mind that maybe he is in a category of Levi, it is not, because we know already that his father is a Kohen, and here you don't have a safek, belevi leka lesapuke. Why? Because you know the new circumstance that he is now. So anyway, מה יקה למימר? בין גרושה או בין חלוצה הוא. Because you may say that he is a son of divorcee or חלוצה. It can be so, because if he was, he cannot receive a tithe. לא מבעיה למאן דאמר מעשר ראשון אסור לזרים, דלא הבו יהב אלי. Right? So he is prohibited to eat the first tithe. אלא אפילו למאן דאמר מעשר ראשון מותר לזרים, meaning the one who held the notion that the first tithe can be permitted to others, meaning foreign, meaning that it's a proof that is not halal, that applies only to the situation that the Kohen or Levi themselves give it to someone. But אבל בתורת חלוקה לא יהב אלי. But if you're talking about in a manner of that person attending in order to receive in a threshing floor the tithe while he is not priest, it cannot be. So therefore, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, the fact that one receives a share at the threshing floor proves that he is a Kohen of a good and unflawed lineage. There are those who say that you can follow the next step, which is you can put this braita according to Rabbi Akiva, that according to his view, that fine that that Leviim taking a tithe, it's only in a situation that it's clearly to us that the father was a Kohen, and the reason that he received it is under the category of Kohen and not Levi. That's the way that the Pnei Yoshua said. The Vilna Gaon have the issue in his writing on this matter. He asked a question, why is no discussion here in regard to Pidyon Haben? As you know, baby was born, and 30 days after he was born, he is no longer in a category of Nefel, meaning he is a total independent, in a sense, of healthy child. And in that sense, we have the different category, we discussed it at length once, But Pidyon Ben is when they passing the 30 days period after the child was born. And then we have the ceremony that the Kohen basically releasing with the 5 shkalim. So the Vilna Gaon asks, why is that? It's a well-known story about the Vilna Gaon himself, that he was in a big search of Kohuna until he find the famous Rabbi Raphael Kohen of Hamburg, of Germany. So basically the conclusion in very short, it's only stringency, it's not a proof that he is a Kohen. And the Minchat Chinuch go further with that and ask a question following this notion, what do you do with someone who is married to a woman that is from the Levite family? So basically in those days they receive a special gift for the Levites. So the husband, by merely fact that he is the husband of someone who came from Levi, can he receive the first tithe as the Levi received originally. So the Maharil Diskin said that he cannot do that just because she is originally from that family. And he indirectly derived here the concept of Maaser Rishon, that the Levi cannot receive in that manner. You have to think, again, the category of all this discussion is you have to differentiate between formally someone who comes and deserves to get something versus you get something and you give it to someone else. So in that sense, you have those who entitled to receive. Entitled to receive, it's already there. What they're doing after they receive it is one category, versus someone who's not entitled to stay in line and receive, which is a total different category. והחולק בבית דין אינה חזקה, which means the Mishnah the Bible tells that one who receives a share of Truma in rabbinic court does not establish a presumptive status of priesthood. So it's not raya, it's not the fact that he received it in a bet din, that he is a kohen. What's more than a bet din to bring here the presumptive status? So the Amar Rav Sheshet, Hachike Amar, HaCholek Truma b'nechsei avim mechav bebet din ena chazaka. So you have here Yerusha inheritance, and someone divided from the property that left from his father, from different mother. So it's a word came out over his mother that she is disqualified for kehuna. So therefore the child is halal. So the fact that it distributed to the heir in a bed din, that's not a proof to make him a kohen. So Gemara said pshita, that's obvious. So it's a book written by Meir Eric, which is a very well-known rabbi. He derived from that the question of the law of inheritance in general, because when you have inheritance by different children, especially if it's a painful situation, you see it a lot in this country, that you have more than one marriage, and sometimes the one of the subsequent marriages was involved with a non-Jewish spouse or relationship with a non-Jewish spouse, and then you have a situation that is inheritance left, and you need to divide it by the children, how you derive, and if this is any proof for our discussion. Anyway, it's a lot of that from this sugya by Meir Eric. But anyway, מהו דתמה מדהנך לאכילה היינה מלאכילה, כמשמלן הנך לאכילה היי לזבוני. You have to differentiate between using it as a entitled food versus you sell it to Kohanim. So you cannot derive from that a proof that it's kasher. The Ritva said sometimes the recipient of those contributions are so abundant that can a fellow go further and sell from that. If you remember yesterday, we have a discussion over Korban Pesach, of a Paschal lamb in our days. As you remember, in the temple they used to have it. So if you tell me that Truma Utra B'tzibur, so you have to have a special kohen. So imagine you have a kohen that he declare ben achar ben, that he is son after son, a kohen. So the question is that enough? Maybe his grandmother have some psilut, either by kuti, halal. So the Torah tells us at the very end, Barech Hashem Chaylo. So the Torah tells us that it's one of the blessings of the children of Issachar. He said, Yehi Ratzon. It's enough for the Kohen to say that he is from that tribe just from the mother's side. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, En marim lekuna al pi yed echad. Rabbi Yehuda said, when it's come to this decision, one does not elevate a man to priesthood on the basis of one witness. So Rabbi Lazar Eden said it's only when they have people who are challenged. It's a no challenge, but if they challenge that, then it's a different story. And Rabban Shimon Gamliel Omer, you can go and do it. So Gemara asked, Rabban Shimon Gamliel anu Rabbi Lazar, what's the difference between Rabban Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Lazar? So the Gemara said, guess what? וכי תימר ארחד איקה בניו, ורבי אלעזר סבר ערר חד, ורבי שמעון אלעזר סבר ערר תרי. You have to differentiate. That's the idea at the first glance, that you have to differentiate between one witness that challenged that versus two. So you may hold that Rabbi Lazar said that even you have one person that challenged that fellow, if he is a kohen, that already make him disqualified, versus Rabban Shimon Gamliel require two kosher witnesses to challenge that. You cannot do that. Rabbi Yochanan said that clearly in order to have challenge, that it will be accepted by the Bet Din, you have to have two. So what's the real difference between Rabbi Lazar and Rabban Shimon Gamliel? So the Ritva said that the one who come late, it's much stronger than Kol. So imagine you have a Kohen, he declared that he's a Kohen. So you give him the first Aliyah, or you give him whatever, Nesiut Kapayim, and basically you do it in temporarily until it's clarified. One kosher witness come in and testify that he is a Kohen. Beautiful. Next day, two kosher witnesses came in and disqualified him. So what do? So it's a question, now you see, it's a zenut at the Bet Din, which means the Bet Din can take those games and play or not, which is Rabbi Lazar hold that is zenut at the Bet Din. The moment they determine once, it's over. Rabban Shimon Gamliel said, no, they have the right to challenge and re-challenge and reopen the case again and again until things will be total clear. So therefore, the second can come in and refute the first one. Tosfot said that if it was a rumor, the rumor is talking about that fellow, that his father was a Kohen, but it's all kind of rumors about the situation and him. So Tosfot have a question, is that rumor is stronger than someone who come before the court and testified or not? Is that okay to have those who refute it or not? So the Gemara said, which means we know about the father that he's a Kohen, and all of a sudden they left the community for several years, and it's a lot of rumors, right? And the latest they hear that the father married that woman that was either grusha or chalutza, right? And therefore the son is halal. Ve'achtinei. So therefore the Bet Din come in, and after they hear all these rumors, so they did not rule that he is not qualified. Because you cannot go by just rumors. Rumor is not sufficient. It's almost like hearsay evidence in a federal court. But the idea is, the Bet Din said, okay, you are on hold until the situation will be clarified. You cannot get the first aliyah. You cannot go do the Siyat Kapayim until we clarify the situation. So even it's only rumor, is not clear testified. And you have one witness that came and said, I know that he is a priest of unflowed lineage. 26b, ve'askine. So as a result, because this witness came in, so therefore we elevate him back to the priesthood, as one witness is sufficient to negate the rumor, right? Ve'atu beitrei ve'amrei ben grusha u'ben chalutzau. And as another two came in, and guess what they did? They said, no, this guy is the son of grusha or chalutza, right? Ve'achtinei, and we descend him. Ve'ata edechad v'amar yadana bede kohenu. So now you have another fellow that came in, and it said a kohen. So let's make sure that we all understand, right, Elliot? Listen to this. The fellow declared that he's a kohen.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of rumors. The rumors said that his father went with a lady that she is grusha or chalutza, etc., etc. So it was the first ed that said that no, he's a kohen. Fine. So we let him do the duchanim, we let him do the first aliyah. Then the two came in and said a story about grusha and chalutza, and we ascend him. And then another fellow came in and said that he is fine, he is a real kohen. So Tosfot said by the Rabbanon, you go by the chazakah. But here you see a very interesting situation. You have 2 versus 2 in a different timing that give a conflicted a testimony. So the question is, the Rishonim ask, should we go batar chazakah? You have trei utrei, you have 2 witnesses versus 2 witnesses. So does that mean that he's a kosher kohen or not? So the Chatam Sofer said, the Torah tells us, Barech Hashem Chaylo. That's part of that. We said that let us give him the kohen, because most probably his avoda, his work will be ksheira. ודכולי עלמא מצטרפים לעדות. והכה במחש לזכות לבית דינא כמפלגתנא כמה סבר כמאן להחתין לא מסכין לי חשש לזכות לבית דינא. ורבן שמעון לסבר התנא החתין לי ואנא מסכין לי לזכות לבית דינא לא חשין. It's beautiful. One said, look, you cannot play those games with the Bet Din. The Bet Din ruled once and it's over. Period. One fellow came and testified one way, the Bet Din let him do it. Then the 2 came in and they changed it. You cannot play this game. And then another fellow came in and changed it back. It's ziluta. It's denigrating the respect, the value of the Bet Din. You cannot do that. Okay? Then the other, Rabban Shimon Gamliel said, look, it's a process. It's okay to reopen a case when it's a challenge. It's not denigrating the respect of the Bet Din, and therefore you can go ahead and do it. So the Pnei Yoshua tells us, look, the reality is this. When it's a 100% mistake, they thought that he is pasul and he turned to be kasher, so you don't have a ziluta. You don't have an issue because it's 100% crystal clear. But if you have a situation of one person came, then 2 came, and then another one came, and the 2 conflicted the 2, and the testimony was a little different manner, but it's in a framework of 2 versus 2, then you have the issue of ziluta. You have the issue of the proper respect that people will give to the Bet Din. Because think, and the further consequences of a community, how they treat the decision of the Bet Din when they see constant change. They feel that these people are not decisive, they are vacillate, they are basically coming and back and forth and back and forth. אלא אמר רב אשי במצטרפין לעדות כמפלגי. Meaning, here the issue is, as we said, you have a first witness that come in. Think about money, it would be much easier to understand it. You have a fellow that came in, one witness, and said, I saw Reuven lend $10,000 to Shimon. That's it. Then you have later another fellow, let's call him David, that he came and he said, Shimon confesses to me that he borrowed 10,000 from Reuven. I never saw money, I never saw any deal. And you have 2 others that came separate, let's call him Issachar and Zvulun, and they said, we saw how Shimon gave $10,000 to Reuven. So you see here a situation that was 1, and sometimes you have another 2 or another one that come back in the same manner, and then you have another one. So basically you combine them, or you treat it as 1, 2, and 1. How you treat it? So the Ran said, if you have a situation that those witnesses came in a separate way, we basically, since the bottom line, the consequences are the same, we treated them as 1. But here Rav Ashi continued and elaborated and said, "B'flukta dani tanai en utam mitzarefet ad shiru detani en utam mitzarefet ad shiru shneim keechad." One view is saying it cannot be accepted. It's almost like hearsay, as long as there are 2 did not come together as a pair, as a 2, and testified over one manner together. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha amar afilu b'zeh achar zeh. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha said, based on Gemara in Sanhedrin, page 30, that it can be in a subsequent order or in a different timing, As long as they declare over something, you take their testimony, period. ואין עדותן מתקיימת בבית דין עד שיעידו שניהם כאחד. So it means the final stage, it has to be a combined testimony. Meaning, if one come today and the other one come tomorrow, we cannot accept it. רבי נתן אומר, שומעים דבריו של זה היום, וכשיבוא חברו למחר, שומעים דבריו. You can have one fellow that come today from one location, and the other can come a different, and therefore you go by that way. So, there's a famous story about the Tzemach Tzedek, the great Hasidic Rebbe. It's and you see it also in Aruch HaShulchan. We talk about the great book of Noda B'Yehuda. Noda B'Yehuda is a great posek that lived in the city of Prague in Czechoslovakia in those days. And he has Ma'adura, the original book, and then you have Ma'adura Tinyana, the second book. So he said that he always go by the original, meaning he made the halachic decision, and then it was challenges, and then sometimes he changed, but he always take the original decision as the one who is accepted. It reminds me in a way the story in modern Russia. You know, it was one of the greatest writer in the old Russia by the name of Dostoevsky. You must probably heard that name, right? So original Dostoevsky has a manuscript that was written by the KGB, many times cut and change and censor, etc., etc. And for many decades, Dostoevsky was only available in the way that was scrutinized by the authority. But the beauty of that is that the new Russian world that started after the 80s, they purposely requested to see Dostoevsky, the original one. And to this very day, the most popular writing of Dostoevsky is the original manuscripts, which is again fascinating to think that when you're writing something and you have so many times people who edit and change, right, Kat? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you realize that the original way of the author writing is the way it should be done. But it's another derivative from this sugya. You know that the Rabbonim who does before Pesach is selling of chametz, right? So he's selling of chametz. So what the rabbi does, he take it to a bet din, and bet din take it to a non-Jew and selling the chametz. So it's a discussion halacha. What do you do with those eidim, with those people who were witnesses of selling the chametz? Can be a person who sell to a rav the chametz be a ed of the selling to a non-Jew? Our notion among the poskim, some said that the fellow cannot be a ed. The rabbi should take a eidim or bet din that doesn't have any negiot, any part of attachment, and if it is, it's a challenge. The Mishna tells us in a case of woman who was imprisoned by the idolaters, al yedei mamon, either because she owed money, which is monetary offense committed by her husband. So once she is released after pay his debt, muteret leba'ala. So the concern is that she may be violated during the time that she was with them. And the Gemara said in Avodah Zarah 23 that one of the things that happened constantly in ancient time, it is that manner. So here we said that if she was in a consent then to do it, so then she's prohibited to her husband. But if she was forced, so it's a different story, excluding a case of kohen, that even she was raped, she can no longer live with a kohen. But we here differentiate between two situations, because if al yedei nefashot, if it was the capital offense and sentenced to death, once she is released, asura leba'ala, she is forbidden to her husband, even if she's not a kohen's wife. Why? Because perhaps we think that her captors violated her and she is acquiesced to one of them. Again, that's the Rashi view that it may happen because of the forceful situation. So The Gemara now circumscribe that rule, and they said, אמר רב שמואל ברב יצחק אמר רב, לא שנו אלא שיד ישראל תקיפה על עובדי כוכבים. אבל יד עובדי כוכבים תקיפה על עצמן, אפילו על ידי ממון אסורה לבעלה. Here the Gemara said that you have to differentiate, and that's again painful part of Jewish history. If you tell me the authority of the Jewish people is dominant citizens, then you can go by this rule. But if the authority of the nations of the world is dominant over us, so then the euphemism for dominance over the Jewish people, even a woman who is imprisoned to do the marital offense is forbidden to her husband, as there is nothing preventing her people who kept her in a jail from violating her.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai